All right, let's get started on the panel, which is almost always the most awaited event in any mentoring workshop. So I have here four wonderful, amazing colleagues that I'm very proud to have brought to this platform. So we have, in the order that I'm seeing them on my screen, we have Marta Kwiatkowska from the University of Oxford. We have Swarat Chaudhuri from UT Austin. We have Justin Su from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we have Liana from Amazon. So we will begin the panel by having each of the panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their journey to the point where they are right now. And everyone, please type up your questions quickly on Slido so we can get to ask these wonderful colleagues many of your questions and hear what they have to say about questions that we all have. Martha, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Okay. Yes. No, I'm fine, yes. Yeah, I had to work out how to unmute on Zoom. Okay, we standardize on Microsoft Teams, so this is a new experience for me. So I'm Marta Kwiatkowska. I'm a professor at the University of Oxford in the Department of Computer Science. And now you may guess from my accent that I'm not English myself. I was born and brought up in Poland. And this is where I studied computer science, which was called informatyka in Polish. And I was one of the first intakes of the subject, which was beginning to grow in popularity and has excited me right from my first year. And it continued to excite me. You know, it continues to excite me even now. I should say that when I was studying computer science in Poland in my university, at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, was growing out of mathematics. And in particular, when I studied, I was about half of the intake as a girl. So we had 50-50 split between girls and boys. When I then moved to the UK to study for PhD, the situation has changed, and we have about 8% of girls who are studying computer science, and that has not changed much. And to start with, I was the only woman academic in my first academic position. Now, in terms of research, I started with concurrency, actually going back to my master's thesis, which was based on research papers by Tony Hoare on his first version of CSP, communicating sequential processes. And I continued with my PhD in concurrency, in particular non-interleaving concurrency and fairness. And then I became interested in model checking and developed a variant of model checking jointly with my students, Dave Parker and Gethin Norman. We developed PRISM, the probabilistic model checker, which is still being used. After about 20 years, it's nearly 20 years since the first version of PRISM was released. After an academic position at the University of Leicester, when I got my PhD, I moved to Birmingham, and in 2007, I transferred to Oxford to a new chair position that was created. I'm now ahead of the automatic verification theme, which is a group of about 8 academics and about 40-50 people in total, if you include researchers and PhD students. And I'm also an associate head of the MPLS division, that is about 1/4 of the university, the Mathematical, Physical and Life Sciences division. Okay.
Thanks,
and
Marta.
I'm glad to be here. Okay, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Swarat, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Swarat Chaudhuri. I'm a professor at UT Austin, and I'm also extremely glad to be here. As for my research interests, I've worked on many sorts of problems over the years. My PhD work was on logic and automata theory. After that, I got interested in program analysis and concurrency for a while. Then I really fell in love with the area of synthesis. I continued to work in that space. Although more recently, the things that I've been doing, they're more in the intersection of program synthesis and machine learning. And now just the path that I took to where I'm now, I grew up in India, and I was doing my undergrad studies when I got this opportunity to do an internship at this wonderful place called the Chennai Mathematical Institute. It's this institute focused on theoretical computer science, mathematics, and theoretical physics in Chennai, India. And there I was first exposed to automata theory over infinite words, and my mind was blown. And I did a follow-up internship after that. I got very invested in this. I started doing research in this space. And then I went to do my PhD with Rajiv Allur, who was just an absolutely amazing advisor. With him, I did work on automata on these or push-down systems, automata which have stacks, and how they can be used to model software systems and their verification problems. Then I got my first faculty appointment right after I graduated in 2007. I was at Penn State, and there, my interests again shifted a little bit. I saw this really wonderful talk by a computer architect from University of Wisconsin, Gurinder Sohi. He came and talked about, how so at that time I was very interested in, getting interested in concurrency, and he was talking about how, a lot of the concurrent applications, there is this element of approximation in them. And so I got very interested in this idea, and then I started working on, ideas in approximate computing, and this led to a series of papers on robustness analysis of programs and things like that. So then I stayed at Penn State for a few years. Then I moved to Rice University, where I spent 8 wonderful years. And that's where I started talking to some of my machine learning colleagues and got really interested in this area of formal methods intersects machine learning. And then I've been at UT Austin since this January, where there's a wonderful formal methods group and also a great machine learning group. So I'm having a great time.
Thanks, Swarat. Liana, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Liana Hadarian. I'm currently senior applied scientist at Amazon Web Services. I've been at Amazon for over a year and a half, and I started off working on constraint solving for access control policies, and then now I moved into static analysis. I guess in terms of how I got here, so I'm originally from Romania, and that's where I did my high school, where it was I was in a computer science informatics class, and then actually did my undergraduate studies in the US, where I was computer science and studio art double major. And I thought that if I want to bring these two things together, I need to do something like I don't know, computer graphics or HCI. Turns out I thought Turing machines and the holding problem are way more fun than any of those things. So I got into I got into logic, more discrete math things, and I ended up doing my PhD in computer science at New York University with Clark Barrett, where I was working on the CBC4 SMT solver for mostly on the bit vector theory back then. After that, I did a postdoc at Oxford, so I briefly overlapped with Marta, with Daniel Koenig. And then I guess I switched to the dark side. I moved to industry and worked for 3 years at Synopsys on the covariate static analysis tool. And after that, I joined Amazon Web Services. I went from constraint solving to static analysis.
Thanks, Liana. Justin.
Yes, I'm the last.
Yes.
So, hello, my name is Justin Su. I grew up in California, and I generally work in the area of verifying probabilistic programs, or thinking about probabilistic programs. So I think I took maybe not a very direct path to get to where I am, but I grew up in California, and my background was mostly in mathematics. But I think in my 3rd or 4th year of undergrad, I took this functional programming class, and I just really loved it. And I thought like, well, I should try to do graduate school in this stuff, even though I knew almost nothing about functional programming at all. So I applied to a lot of places, just kind of, I applied a lot of places I've never really even heard of. I was really fortunate to end up at University of Pennsylvania for my graduate school. And there, like, again, my research took like kind of a different turn because joining at the same time was a new faculty called Aaron Roth, and he was an expert in differential privacy. So I, again, had never heard anything about differential privacy before, but I ended up working on that with Benjamin Pierce as well, language design for differentially private programs for most of my PhD. So after a few postdocs, I'm now at University of Wisconsin, where there's a very nice group, and I'm continuing to think more broadly about probabilistic programs.
Thank you, Justin. So I think many of you already identified this in your introductions, but I just wanted to revisit the specific point in your life when you decided to become a researcher, right? I mean, you all did develop or discover a love for computer science in general at some point. But when did you, I mean, you could be a computer scientist in many ways, right? You could have fun solving problems and coding in many ways. So at what point did you actually decide to become a researcher? So maybe Liana, you can go first.
Sure. I guess I don't think I ever decided to become, or it wasn't like a day like, oh, I'm going to do research. It's more like I just really like this type of computer science, and that's where I can do more of it and learn more about it from really, really smart people. So, and then it kind of just grew from there.
Okay. Who wants to go next?
Let me see. I can say a bit more, I think. So I think, like Liana, I don't think I had any one day where I felt like I was going to become a researcher. I do think there were some points where I kind of changed my path, I guess. Like when I took this class in undergrad, and I thought I should think more about this. But I think I've generally been mostly taking it a few years at a time and thinking about I kind of enjoy what I'm doing currently, and I think I would enjoy doing it for a few more years. And what I happen to be doing right now is doing research, I think. But I think it's kind of, I always thought it was very intimidating to think of myself, as like exclusively a researcher or something like that.
Marta, you want to go next?
Okay, so for me, I suppose you can guess this was many years ago, but I think also because I was in Poland at the time, the career structure for academics was very different. So in particular, you started as a junior assistant professor post-masters. Now, during the degree, I really liked problem solving, and and in particular, I liked not just solving problems, but also learning, new material. But my first job came actually with teaching responsibilities. That was, the main responsibility of a junior assistant professor, but as part of that, you also had a contract to complete a PhD while teaching, and you had 8 years. So I was kind of forced into research at that stage.
I see. Interesting. Swarat?
Yeah, so for me, for better or worse, this was a bit of a default because both of my parents are professors. And I grew up around especially my father's grad students all around us. And it just seemed like a great life. So I had to take, I guess, an active decision not to follow that path. But then when I got exposed to actually doing research myself, it seemed like, it seemed great. It was pretty great for me, at least. And I really enjoy the technical aspects of it, but I also enjoy some of the other facets of academic or research life, especially I have 2 little kids now, and I get a lot of flexibility from my academic or research career that would be not necessarily so easy in certain other careers. For example, I can just schedule my meetings at times at certain times, and then certain other times, even if it's not normally during the workday, I could just take a couple of hours and go for a hike with or a visit to a park with a couple of my kids, and so I really enjoy it. And
Yes.
but it came in as a bit of a default.
Right. I mean, that was actually the case for me too. So I understand. I relate to that the most. Okay. So I actually had another question for you all. And if you're watching this, by the way, on YouTube, send in your questions on the Slido link we have posted on Slack, please. So were there any fortunate accidents in your journey that led you in certain directions? So what were some of the unplanned what was some of the unplanned steering that happened in your journey that probably caught you by surprise, but you grabbed that opportunity and it worked out well for you?
So
Whoever wants to go first, yeah.
okay, I can say something there. Yeah, so when I was an undergrad, I had this set of schools that I wanted to do my PhD in. And then it turned out that I didn't get into any of them. I'm not going to name those schools, but you can probably guess. And then, even though it was past the deadline for application, I sent an email to Rajiv and said that, look, I've loved reading a couple of your papers during my internship. And I would really love to work with you. And he said, okay, let's talk. And then I got into Penn. And then that was for me, one of the best things that happened to me, because during the PhD years, I learned a huge amount. Rajiv really, I think, taught me to think technically. And so, yeah, that was one unplanned thing that happened. And another thing also, I would say later, when I graduated from my PhD, that was not a great time for academic hiring. And so I went to Penn State, which was a great school overall, but in particular in formal methods, there was no one. And this is, again, not something that I had expected. I had always expected that I would go to a place where there is already a lot of research on programming languages and formal methods going on. There would be these, I'd be doing focused technical work on this sort of stuff. But there, I had to kind of be on my own, which it turned out had some positives. It was, I was forced to interact with folks who are not in my area, and that really helped. In the scheme of things, I think that having deep foundations in your specific area, that's important, but it's also very important to be able to know what's going on broadly in computer science, because a lot of the times new problems show up through intermixing of ideas between areas, and even, I would say, even outside computer science. So I was forced to do that, and I'm very grateful in retrospect that all of these things happened.
No, and your body of work definitely reflects that intersection with multiple areas. Does anybody else want to pitch in?
Okay, I can.
Okay. Go ahead, Marta.
Okay, so how I became an academic, it was actually not because I was looking for an academic position. I was finishing my master's at my department at the Jagiellonian University in Poland, and there was a vacancy created suddenly because the person holding an assistant professorship position was called to military service. So I was then invited to apply for that position, and I was told that if I finish my master's thesis in the next 3 months, as opposed to something like another year, I can get that position. So that was, I think, a very, fortunate accident, for me. Now, the other example that I can give is how I became interested in probabilistic verification, because my PhD, my master's and my PhD were in concurrency. But of course, I knew about verification because of Ed Clark's work, Ken Macmillan, etc. In particular, I knew about symbolic model checking and BDDs. And when I moved to Birmingham, I got funding for a PhD student, and found a PhD student who was actually a graduate from Oxford, but a maths graduate from Oxford, who didn't know much logic, but knew an awful lot about probability. And another lucky thing that happened was that Crystal Bayer came to visit me as part of her sabbatical, and it turned out that Crystal Bayer knew an awful lot about measure theory. So we just put several heads together, and that was a seed, of the whole project. But in terms of the specific focus, because with the work on probabilistic model checking that I'm following, is I'm always looking for implementation tool and applications. And the push in that direction came actually from Moshe Vardi, who specifically encouraged me to do what Ed Clark is doing, looking at implementation and application. And it just stayed with me for quite a long time.
I see. So actually, maybe we can switch to a very popular question on Slido right now. This is to everyone. How frequently do you experience imposter syndrome? And if so, what are your best tricks to cope with it? This is not quite a career choice question, but this is an important question that we actually tried to address in the survey too. But I think people do want to know answers to this, because the vast majority of people, as the survey showed, experience this.
Right. I guess I can try to start off. I think, I think imposter syndrome is quite widespread. I think, I myself definitely also feel sometimes, things are not going so well, or sometimes you work in a project for a very long time and you think like it really should, be better received, or people should be more interested in this, but for whatever reason, it keeps getting rejected or whatever. And that's definitely quite negative. I think it's quite natural to feel a little bit down, or maybe more than a little bit down when that happens. And I don't have any specific strategies. I think one thing I try to do is to work on multiple things at the same time. So I can switch to something else where maybe I feel like I can make better progress. But that may be difficult for some people who are want to focus on one thing. But I also try to ignore the short-term things as much as possible. Though it's quite difficult. But I think that the main thing I would like to say is that definitely I myself have definitely wonder a lot about, whether I should be continuing along this particular path in research or on this topic, or whether I should be switching to something else. And I think that is, unfortunately or fortunately, kind of quite natural in this line of work.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to weigh in?
Well, I should say, obviously, that this is something that's very common for women, and it just doesn't go away with time, unfortunately. But I should say that I think an imposter syndrome, but certainly loss of confidence is quite a natural feeling every time you are starting out in a new direction. And in research, almost everything that we do involves a shift in a new direction. Perhaps, sometimes it's not a complete shift, but always it is exploring some new angle, even, any incremental improvement is looking at something that seems obvious. But when you look at the detail, you may discover that it actually wasn't obvious and some of your assumptions were wrong. So I think for me, the best way to handle this is just to get deeper and deeper and really aim to understand the problem and the issues in order to deal with that.
Thanks. Swarat?
Yeah, I would say that one of the challenges in academic research is that there is this uncertainty always that you're by definition working on problems that may not pan out, or your approaches may not pan out. And also there is the reality of people getting a lot of negative feedback from the review process, and often the negative feedback outweighs the positive feedback, especially when a project is just starting. So I have definitely, felt that there were times when, I felt that, okay, this project is not really going anywhere, especially after, getting some really harsh reviews. And I've gotten plenty of those in my life. I've also had calls with PhD students and postdocs, sometimes late in the night, trying to persuade them that, look, this too shall pass. And that's what I would say, that a lot of the times, if you take the longer view, if you go beyond, the immediate set of reviews that you've gotten, or this feeling that you're having right now based on something that somebody said, it's going to pass in the longer run. And a lot of the times, the way to get around that is to just focus on the problem, as has been said already, and just ask yourself, how can I do better? What are the ways in which I can get deeper? What are the questions that I would ask if I were to review this paper? And in the longer run, you are all doing PhDs in computer science. You're very smart people. You can do it, make it in lots and lots of different areas in life. So you're definitely capable of finishing your PhD and being researchers. Now there are going to be these temporary setbacks, but focusing on the slightly longer horizon, and also creating a group of folks with whom you can really share your feelings, including your feelings of imposter syndrome. This also I found very helpful. Having those long sessions during grad school where we vented about paper reviews and other things that were wrong with the system. This was actually really helpful, at least for me.
Thanks, Swarat. There are many more questions, so I'm actually going to move on now. There are some popular questions that really relate more to the second half of the panel, which we should be starting around now, but I'm going to postpone for just a little bit because there are, I think, a couple of questions related to career choices that I would like to get to first. So Mohit Tekriwal asks, since we have a panel with professors and people working in industry, which by the way was very much by design, I wanted to know, how is academic research different from that in the industry?
I can talk about it maybe from my experience. So at least, and I can speak just about my personal experience, obviously. So for me, it feels that one of the problems I had as a grad student, and when you're working on an SMT solver, one of the problems you have is like, you really need a lot of well-motivated benchmarks from a good application. Kind of knowing what application it really helps. So that was always a challenge. Like, who do you collaborate with so you get these like benchmarks so you solve a useful problem and don't just work on craft stuff. I think in industry you have the application, so it's really nice that it takes away some of that. At least for me, took away a lot of the uncertainty. Is what I'm doing worth it? Because you're getting paid to do it because somebody really cares about it and you're solving a really real world problem. On the other hand, solving real world problems is not always the most intellectual fun thing to do. It can be really fun at times, but there's bits where you kind of have to slash through it. So for me, I think that was one of the biggest differences, and I personally really enjoy feeling that what I'm working on, even if it's feeling that what I'm working on actually has an impact and people are using it, and it's something that's helping things in some way. So.
Thanks. Have the rest of you had any experience in industry that can help you contrast academic research with industry, or maybe based on conversations you've had with your colleagues in industry?
Yeah, so I can say I have spent some time in companies, mostly as in a consulting capacity. And also I have friends in industrial research. So I think one has to also clarify what kind of industry we are talking about. Microsoft Research is industry, but it is kind of close to academia. And then there are folks in Amazon and Facebook and Google who are much more embedded into product groups. And yeah, I would agree with what Liana said. To me, it seems like industry is really exciting because there is this direct impact of what you're doing. But at the same time, for me, I personally like the academic life more simply because I like the flexibility. I like the ability to just work on several problems at the same time, some of which may have absolutely no immediate application. But that's just personal preference. I think both are great.
Wonderful. So I think I'll ask just one more question in this topic before switching to more of the work-life balance related questions. But I think this is a really nice question, and it seems to be very popular too. What are some basic principles you stick to when picking research topics for yourself? How are they related to your respective fields?
Okay, principles. Well, I think for me, I think it's already been mentioned, I think in the discussions about the contrast between academic and industrial research. I think for me, applications are very important, but the problem also has to have a sound core, and I like to look for problems where you need to develop, work with mathematics and develop new algorithms, but always remembering that whatever you deliver, you would want to then sell to potential users. But what I really enjoy about academic research is the fact that you have the freedom and almost complete freedom to choose the direction.
Thanks.
I can say a bit more, I guess, since I haven't answered Noah. I think, I mean, choosing new problems, I think is at least to me, a very mysterious aspect of doing research, which is also very fun. I think myself, I've been mostly working on verifying different properties of probabilistic programs and probabilistic algorithms. And I think a lot of what I look for in a problem is that it should be, of course, well motivated. So it should be some property or some class of algorithms that people are interested in for one reason or another. I think I also try to, I also focus, for better or for worse, on kind of how I feel about the elegance of the problem. Like, is what I'm doing here going to be something that I think is going to be kind of clean, or is it going to seemingly require a lot of complicated techniques? And I try, when possible, to stick towards things that I think are going to be cleaner or involve, fewer bells and whistles. But sometimes this is not possible.
Very nice.
Yeah, I can say a couple things there too. So yeah, for me, a lot of it is about, you start by having conversations with people about what's going on in computer science and elsewhere. And that's how really I have, all the new spaces that I've gotten into over the years, that's all happened through these conversations or watching talks. So I can give one or two examples. Regarding, I mentioned already that I did some work about 10 or so years back on doing robustness analysis of programs, that if you perturb a program a little bit, how much does the output change? And why was that problem interesting? Well, because again, I was seeing this talk by a Wisconsin architect who was talking about how in a lot of applications that are coming up, that are where especially parallelism is important, correctness is not really just a 0-1 thing. You can mess with correctness a little bit. And there is this possibility of trading off between performance and correctness. And so that got me thinking. I started talking to some of the folks who worked on these kinds of systems. And then it seemed like this is actually a pretty cool problem that folks hadn't really looked at in my corner of programming languages and formal methods. That okay, how well can you approximate programs? Can you possibly allow for, rather than thinking about these traditional notions of correctness that I had studied so far, if you just thought about, a slightly bad output is okay, but I don't want rapid swings when there is some noise or error coming from the environment. And so that started off a nice line of research, I think. And what I found is that the basic tools that I had, that I learned during grad school, or by interacting with folks in the CAV and POPL communities, those are still applicable. Your foundations still stay the same. But there are all of these spaces where you can apply these ideas. And then when you start applying them, you can actually go back to the theory space and you come up with new techniques that complement what you already knew with new ideas from other fields, new techniques from other fields. And so for me, it's always has been, there's been this process of conversation with folks in other areas of computer science.
Thank you. So now let's sort of shift focus to talking more about work-life balance. And again, by design, we have people in a variety of careers and career stages on this panel. So Marta is a full professor. Justin is a tenure track faculty member. Swarat, if I'm not mistaken, you are an associate professor. And Liana is from industry, as you know. So let's have some questions about how everyone manages their work-life balance. So let me actually start with a very popular question on Slido. Okay, so I'm a woman who started a PhD after working for years and will have to have kids during my PhD. I'm scared this will negatively affect my research. Any advice? Swarat, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I hesitated to answer because, of course, I'm not a woman, and I have two little kids who take up a lot of my time. But I had them when I was a faculty member. But I'll try to give my perspective, even though it may not be completely correct in this case. I would actually say that, putting myself in the shoe of an advisor, if one of my PhD students were in this situation, I would say that, yes, this is important to you and you should go through with it. And we'll try to figure out a way of making all this work. And I would say that one of the things about, especially your PhD years, is that there is a lot of flexibility in terms of time. And at the end of the day, if you graduate in, let's say, 6 years rather than 5 years, it's not at all a big deal, right? At the end of the day, the question is, what came out of your PhD? Not really, did you take 4 years or 5 years or 6 years? And in fact, I would say that having been on several hiring committees, even if you did a postdoc after your PhD, that also doesn't really matter. You can buy that extra bit of time. Because when you are being evaluated for faculty positions, and I would imagine the same is true for industrial research positions, folks are going to look at your output overall rather than counting the number of years that were taken. So I would say that a PhD is actually not a bad time to have kids if that's important. I would, if anything, say that it's easier to do that than during the first few years of tenure track. But overall, I would still say that one of the joys of academic life for me is that I have this flexibility in terms of time where I can also, I can do all the work that I want to do, but also block out time to spend with my kids.
Thanks, Swarat. Does anybody else want to weigh in?
So can I just add, I think perhaps a little bit of a counterbalance, because Swarat mentioned the PhD that takes 6 years. In the UK, the PhD studies take 3 years plus 1 year for writing up. But, having said this, I've had PhD students, I think male and female, with kids. For women, there is now a maternity leave that you can have during your PhD, and of course it's very similar to, for example, having children as a junior academic. What I would say is that in an academic position, the flexibility is great, and you can use it to, adjust your appointments. Again, Swarat, mentioned this, and it is harder if you actually have to teach, and you have to teach, on a particular day. And I remember when my daughter was ill once or twice, I had to cancel a lecture because we were both sick. And, it does happen. And what you really need is you need support. So you need support from your partner, your family. But if, like in my case, my family were far away, then you need to look for support from friends.
Thanks, Martha. So actually, I'm just going to weigh in on this myself a bit because I've had many conversations on this over the years. But one good advice that I had once gotten was that as a woman in computer science, really, or in research, there is never an optimal time to have kids. And so if you do want to have kids, just figure out what works best in your life, and it may not, you may not be, and don't try to optimize the timing too much, because it's always going to be a bit hard, but many people do it, and academia is quite flexible. So let's actually move on to another question, which is also very relevant. Have any of you had any experiences with the two-body problem, or finding postdocs and academic jobs with a non-academic partner and spouse?
I guess I can talk about that a bit. Yeah, so I guess my boyfriend at time husband now, we're both finishing our PhDs and got postdocs in Europe in different countries. So that actually worked out because compared to the US, Europe's kind of small. So going from France to the UK is not a big deal. And actually what ended up working out for us very well, he's also in the field of formal methods, was after our postdocs, we're trying to figure out where can we be and not together and not sacrifice our careers. And for us, the Bay Area turned out like the right place. And I think it's because we were both on the job market at the, well, I think kind of a bit of a turning point, at least from my point of view, in terms of the hunger in industry for people with formal methods background. Because when I started my PhD, I didn't think of anybody, I didn't think Facebook, Google, or Amazon are ever going to hire me to do what I studied in my PhD. And by the time, we graduated and, the postdoc, there were so many companies that, this was actually a selling point. So in that sense, I think we're very lucky and it worked out for us. So we both applied for jobs and yeah, we're both doing what we used to do for our PhD, roughly speaking. And it's fun.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, so from my perspective, my husband is not an academic, and I think this is something that we have both used to our advantage. But every time I moved jobs, he followed. So that was our solution. And only in a couple of places, and this was when I had a family, I have one daughter. I had to commute for 1 year until we could actually move the family.
I
But
see.
it wasn't like between France and the UK, it was only Leicester and Birmingham and Oxford, which was commutable.
Any more answers, or should we move on? Okay, so actually, I encourage everyone to try and target your questions towards work-life balance. But of course, I'll try to get to your questions, even if they are somewhat unrelated, a little later. I think there is one question that I would like to ask the panelists, which is, what does work-life balance mean to you? And what does it look like for you in your specific case?
I can try to start. So I think for me, work-life balance is kind of how kind of the time I'm doing, let's say, focused work interacts with the rest of the time I'm spending on other things in my life. I think this naturally changes a lot, at least it has changed a lot for me throughout my career. So I think when I was in grad school, I was spending more of my time thinking about very specific problems. And I guess I had the luxury to kind of spend most of my time thinking about that. And then if there were, days or weeks where nothing seemed to progress, I didn't have to, I can kind of just take it easier, I think, for those days and try not to push too hard. I think now that I've started a faculty position, I started about 2 years ago, definitely there's many more duties that I have to do. So it's not like I have just one thing I'm working on, but I have many other things that are research related and not. So I think for myself, I found it more important to try to keep a regular schedule, which I think is a good idea. Before, when I was in grad school, I was kind of, working on things, when I had an idea or when I, understood how to do something, and I would spend some time trying to work something out, essentially like at any time of the week or, at odd hours sometimes. But these days I try to really focus most of my work for myself on like the weekdays and try to do something non-work related on the weekends. I think that's more because I have more things to do now, or more things that I could be doing now. Short-term things and things like that. So I need to try to structure it a bit more.
Thanks. Who wants to go next? Liana?
Sure, I can go next. So I guess comparing my work-life balance during my PhD to the current one, I did feel like, and I don't know if it's true for other students as well, but during the PhD, it had a lot more kind of ups and downs in terms of like intensity of work. So paper deadline is coming, pull 3 all-nighters, then take your time thinking, working through things, and then just have these spikes. So a lot of like little bursts of sprints. I feel like what I found now is that that's not really sustainable. And it's the right way for me to think about it more. It's not like, like it's not a race. Think of it as more like a marathon where you have to find whatever pace works for you to be productive and also, sane and enjoy your life. And for me, the way it works out is I try to keep my work during business hours, like 90% of the time. And sometimes I need to go to the dentist, so I'm going to work later in the evening, or if there is something really important, so I will work extra hours. But for me, especially after now that I'm working from home, as a lot of us are, I find it very helpful to just kind of draw boundaries. And after a certain hour, the plan is to stop working and do something else.
Thanks, Liana. Anybody else wants to weigh in? Marta?
Yes. So, so my husband is, of course, working in the other room. If he was here, he would say, "What life-work balance?" Because his view and my daughter's view is that I work all the time. I mean, of course, I think we've all done all-nighters, so have I, but I don't do that now. What I tend to do is I allow work to spill into the weekends. But having said this, for me, research is like a hobby. So, for example, I enjoy working on a research paper at weekends. I tend to streamline teaching and admin activities and fit them around, the time. I like to have mornings for research, for example, when I'm, bright and do the boring admin in the afternoons. And my husband has also found a solution. He plays golf at weekends.
Thanks. Swarat?
Yeah, so for me, it's really balanced between two kinds of work. It's work related to family and work related to science. And I put a lot of emphasis on my time with especially my kids. And what I found very useful from this point of view is also imposing a structure and setting some boundaries, that there are certain times when I'm just not going to be, answering emails or even necessarily thinking about research. Instead, I'm going to focus on, learning about Mesozoic era animals, which actually is a fascinating subject, even if you don't have kids. So to me, that's been the big difference. When I was in grad school, I had a lot of unstructured time, and also when I didn't have kids, when I was a faculty, I don't have that time anymore. And because time is so scarce, structure. And I would say that from the point of view of the science, having this boundary and taking things a little bit more slowly doesn't necessarily hurt, in my opinion. Because computer science has this particular problem with the deadline culture, that people just get extremely stressed around certain deadlines. And I have pulled lots of all-nighters. 5 years, 10 years down the line, I look back at those deadlines or those papers that I submitted. And if I think, and I think that if I just took it a little bit slower, if I wrote that paper not in a week, but instead maybe just did it over 3 months or submitted maybe to the next deadline, would things be significantly worse? And I don't think they would be at all. Overall, I think the culture has this love of stress and pressure before deadlines. And I don't think that's actually helping science.
Thanks. So there is a somewhat related question, which I think some of you have already answered. During your day-to-day work, how do you balance recurring tasks vis-a-vis big important projects that require serious time investment. And I think Martha, for instance, said that she tries to reserve her mornings for research and leave some of these recurring tasks to the afternoon. Do any of you want to share how you manage this?
Yeah, for me, using tools such as calendars, and also just setting very tight boundaries that I need to do. I need to respond to these grant-related emails within this window of time. This has been very helpful.
Okay.
And just when I need some time for unstructured thinking, I just put it in my calendar so that I can look at my calendar screen and I can see that, okay, there is a 3-hour window there when that's a commitment like any other. And I would maybe, just getting out of the house and just sitting on a park bench and thinking about stuff, but that's still a commitment to myself. And it's as important as any other.
Right. Do any of the rest of you want to share something?
I could say a bit, I guess. I think everybody has their own strategy for managing these kind of recurring things. I mostly use my email inbox for the stuff I have to do every day. I think that usually leads me to kind of tackling the recurring tasks earlier in the day because I can see them in my inbox. I try to save most of the rest of the day for more unstructured thinking or working on things that are more medium term, like if I have to give a talk in a few weeks or something like that, I might think about that. But I don't have a very tight structure for my days, partially because I kind of have a bit more time right now, and also because I guess I don't sometimes feel I don't have the discipline to think about a specific project, at a specific time of day. Yeah, that's mostly what I do.
Okay, thanks. So we are nearing the end of the panel. I'm just going to ask one more question, which is actually unrelated sort of to the topic, but again, it's important, and I encourage all of you to, if possible, hang around on Slack to answer more questions. So this question is actually for Martha. It is from Noreen Conan. How did you transition from an equal gender balance to being? How did the transition from an equal gender balance to being the only woman affect you? I think you have to unmute yourself, Martha.
Okay. Yes, with difficulty. So because I moved actually from a junior academic position in Poland to a PhD and teaching PhD TA type of PhD position in the UK, I kind of made a sideways move. And to start with, because I was, in a teaching position, working on research, I think the gender balance didn't bother me at all. But when I got pregnant and I was the only female academic in the department and all my colleagues' wives did not work, they stayed at home. This is where I think it was very difficult, I think sometimes, because there was an expectation that everybody, had to take an equal share. And with teaching responsibilities, you lose some of that flexibility. And I think, in my case, of course, for me, I had to find a way to deal with family responsibilities at home. And I relied a lot on my partner and, my partner's support. But adjusting to the gender situation, I've never really adjusted. I still think that women are missing out on opportunities if they are really not interested in studying computer science, because it's a great career. It's a great career. It's a little bit like maths is now, what they say, maths is a horizontal science. It underpins everything. Computer science has become like maths now, and it is really a great career with lots of options and opportunities, both on the academic and as well as on industry side.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you everyone for a panel that I certainly enjoyed. And there are lots of wonderful questions remaining that we didn't get to in this 1 hour slot. So hopefully some of you will be around, but in any case, thank you for sharing your insights and for your time.
Thanks a lot for moderating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.